I loved the conversation yesterday. Let's go for it. You lead the way.
Well,
we're going to turn this into a series on the worksheet. So we're going to edit every show together and make it available as a package.
Beautiful.
And the conversation yesterday was perfect to augment that.
Mm-hmm. Really learned a lot, and looking forward to learning much more. And I really appreciate what y'all do is segmenting these type of programs out, because if I am having lots of questions on the worksheets, I'm sure others are. And what's nice about this is you've gone through it with I forget her name, maybe Susan back a short time ago, and then there's others before that. But I think each one has different questions, and listening to several different versions of this, I know it's going to help me tremendously. So I'm glad I don't always have to just rely on what we're doing today. We can rely on your work that's you've done with others in the past, and that's going to really bring a nice round picture in my mind.
Yep. In the special archives, there are 20-plus radio shows where we've done a full worksheet with someone from start to finish, and of course, each one has a different flavor. The second one on the list was one that we did with my brain's gone, Magda, and she did our first online or on the radio show multiple, like I think when she was complete, we got into the Hydra worksheet session, and I think she had 17 worksheets to do by the time she finished. So it's a great example as to how when you're paying subtle attention to your subtlest thoughts, which most people don't do until they start writing it down, then it's a great demonstration of how to open levels and levels that most people didn't even know were there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't know. I still don't realize the magnitude of that. How much work is there, but it's going to come. So, Michael, what is the name of that segment you mentioned again? I'm not sure I've heard that title before. You said it's in
the one that
archive?
I spoke of with Magda? Yes, in the archives, there's a set of special radio shows where either Dr. Tim or myself or Jeannie has walked somebody through a total worksheet. The second one in the list is the one that we did with Magda, and we call the worksheet we did with her a Hydra worksheet. And if you remember, in Greek mythology, the Hydra was the creature that when you cut her head off, several other heads grew out of the stump of her neck.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Hydra, when you start digging into one issue, you start to see that doesn't stand on its own. Oh, there's a piece over here. Oh, there's another one here, and there's another one here. Well, that particular worksheet, if I remember correctly, it's 11 years ago now, but she ended up with 17 different worksheets to do out of the one that she started with. And that's one of the reasons why I strongly urge people to do the worksheets in writing, because we're used to passing over the subtle thoughts that are in the unconscious, that if we just were paying attention and writing, we'd notice a lot of the unconscious dynamics that we normally just gloss over. So the writing of the worksheet slows people down and allows them to look deeper into what the thought processes are that support the perceptual construct of the moment, the reality that their mind is showing them.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
So that one's a fun lesson.
And Magda, I believe, is the one that helped me understand the importance of, first, helped me understand how she does the sheets, and I took off doing it that way. So I'm writing it out. Of course, I like to take notes and be able to look back on things. And so it really helps. It's been helping me a lot, Michael, a lot.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's been really, really a nice journey, and it's going to get better.
All right. Well, you lead the way.
So,
Where are we going to head now? If you got a question from yesterday before we lead into the actual steps, and you want to just go right into the steps of the worksheet, where are we at?
well, I appreciate that thought. I don't have any specific questions from yesterday. Some may come up, of course. Again, really help me understand the 3 different segments of our mind. And as I look back on my notes, looking at the worksheet notes, we left off on 2A, where you were talking about Native Americans and generational patterns.
Right.
That's the last thought I have.
Okay. Well, let's start with 2A, a quick review. I choose to honor truth. Now, when I write out in number 1, when I describe a perceptual construct of reality in my mind that's based in hostility or fear, I know that my mind is using corrupt data and is therefore presenting me with a lie. I mean, we don't have to know anything more about what's going on in the situation or who did what or when it happened and how it happened. We don't have to know one thing to know that our mind is lying to us. And that is my mind using some form of hostility or fear to produce this construct? If so, then by definition, my mind is using corrupt data. And one of the ways that we prove that to people is we'll ask the question, have you ever done anything you regret? Of course, everybody kind of, in an audience kind of laughs and puts their hand up. Yeah, okay. What were you feeling that motivated you to do what it is that you now regret? 100% of the time, the answer is they were feeling something based in hostility or fear. People never do things they regret when they're really totally, completely connected to love. I have had people who said, I was in love with someone and I did something I regret. It's like, wait a minute. There's a difference between the false game of being in love and actually functioning as love. Lots of people, what they call being in love is really based in matching bags of garbage, and there's all kinds of hostility or fear under it, so that being in love can produce all kinds of crazy results. But when we're functioning as love directly, it's not dependent on another person. It has nothing to do with another person. So when I recognize that once I've filled out step number 1 and there's some form of hostility or fear going on, my mind's telling me a lie, and most people absolutely love their lies. And when we love our lies, we're living in blockage of truth. Remember, there's only 9 slots. Remember that Harvard research. 10,000 brain cells are firing. There's a maximum of 9 bits of data that gets into that perceptual construct. And if the 9 bits are filled with information based in hostility or fear, there's no room for love to enter. There's no room for truth to enter. And most people love that state because they're members of the most common religion on earth, and that is the religion of blame. And of course, the religions of blame have the big blamer in the sky that's going to send them to some fiery place and punish them. So the whole thing from start to finish is based in blame rather than based in the Creator's essence, which is love. So step 2, I want to move into this space where I'm willing to honor truth. So I choose to honor truth and willingly face and process out all disease-producing energies from all of my relations, the Taquias and the Native Americans. And of course, if you look at that generational thing, that story of the Jews wandering in the desert for 40 years, which when you think about it, do you think a savvy group of people who know astronomy quite well could possibly get lost in a 35 square mile area for 40 years? It's ridiculous. The desert, you were talking about getting those other levels of mind. The desert is a code word for the unconscious. Most people usually wander around for a period of about 40 years before they start to suspect that maybe there's something going on they don't know about, something that they're hiding from themselves, or they realize that, gee, I've been through this 87 different times with 42 different people. I'm the only one that was there every time. This is about me. That's called living in the desert. And of course, to get into the alternative, which the promise was the promised land, and my offering is the promised land is nothing other than a land of conscious co-creation, living in a state where we know that we are love, and we're co-creating with love what happens in our lives, rather than creating out of the unconscious. And you remember in that particular parable, that particular allegory, something had to happen to get out of the desert. What was it? He said the old generation had to die off. I didn't mean everybody in old physical bodies had to physically die. That's a misinterpretation. The root of the word generation is genari. It means cause. All of the causes held in the mind that produce these untoward results that we go, why are they doing this to me again? Are those things in our own unconscious. So the causes held in the unconscious that produce negative creation have to be faced and dealt with. Once we do that, then you get to enter the promised land. And that's, for everybody. That's simply, there's nothing theological about that. There's nothing religious about that. It's not a religious story. It's just, where do you live? Do you live in your unconscious and wonder why? Or do you live as a conscious human being and consciously create what happens in your life? Make sense?
Makes sense.
And the next step is to stand in the willingness, to an expression of willingness. Actually, we used to have down at the Heart Center, just outside of this side sliding glass door, there's underneath where the bathrooms are now, there was a closet, and that's where we kept all the cleaning supplies. We called that closet cosmic grease. And that's what we call willingness. Have I got the cosmic, am I willing to hold myself accountable, honor truth enough to work through what's going on? And if I am, then I'm going to go into what in the system of medicine I'm trained in, naturopathic medicine, is called a healing crisis. And a healing crisis means that, or is recognized as, I go along in my life and I realize that I'm not a physical being, but I'm an energetic being. Relative to my energy system, there are two qualities of energy. What builds the system up, what tears the system down. Integrative energy, yes, I want to play there. Disintegrative energy in Aramaic was called sin. It's an archery term. Fired at the bullseye, or you fired at the target on the archery range, and if you miss the bullseye, the scorekeeper yelled sin. That's all the word means. It simply means off the mark. And so when I allow energies that are off the mark to enter my field, literally, and they enter as thoughts, and if they're thoughts based in hostility or fear, I create neuropeptides based in hostility or fear, which become chemistry in my cell, and disintegrative chemistry is the chemistry that comes from hostility and fear. And so if I put it in there, and there were symptoms that happened when the energy was going in, it's only logical that on the way back out, the same symptoms are going to occur. So now am I willing to embrace that energy? Am I willing to look at, the pain, the sadness, the grief, the hatred, the rage of my whole life, whatever I haven't dealt with, whatever I have been in the religion of blame about and talked about how it's all everybody else's fault, or if I come from a bloodline of people who are always talking about how it's everybody else's fault, then I'm moving into responsibility, so I'm willing to take responsibility and go through these symptoms. As the energy starts to move back out, the symptoms are going to be identical to the energy as it went in. And it happens on three different levels: the physical, the mental, and the emotional. So on a physical level, healing looks like any kind of physical symptom you've ever had and low energy. On a mental level, healing looks like any kind of negative thought you've ever had and confusion. On an emotional level, healing looks like any kind of negative feeling you've ever had and depression. And most people don't want to go there. And most doctors, when they see that, go, oh my God, you've got a disease going on, we better get you a pill to shut that symptom down. And we're saying, no. Go the opposite. Go to willingness. Keep doing what vitalizes you, instead of when the emotional pain comes up, running to the refrigerator and taking out a quart of ice cream, go to your sprout jar and grab a handful of sprouts and vitalize and strengthen yourself. Stand in willingness and allow your structure to process out and throw off what never belonged. So it can look like any kind of physical, mental, or emotional symptom that one has ever had. And if you're doing the right things, and there's some questions you can ask yourself when you become symptomatic to determine whether or not you're in a healing process or a disease process, and whether you want to go for willingness or whether you want to go for a pill. So the first question you ask yourself when you notice you become symptomatic is, in a general way in my life, since I've been learning this new work, a new way of living, have I been doing more and more of the quote-unquote right things? Nutritionally, emotionally, relationally? Am I living the commitment? Am I doing my forgiveness work? If I've been doing more and more of the right things, then I'm becoming vitalized. What most people do when pain comes is they run and find some kind of a drug. Hostility is nothing other than an internally produced drug. It's an anesthetic. It helps people not to feel their pain. When hostility doesn't work, that's when people turn to stronger drugs. There's actually a very interesting film out there called Thank You for Sharing. And it's a little risque because it's about addiction, but one of the primary addictions they're talking about in the movie is sexual addiction. How people turn to sex as an anesthetic in a way not to feel and deal with what's going on inside of them. And it's a really powerful portrayal because there are actually several different people with several different addictions that are reviewed through this film. And in each case, as each person is getting on the edge, the stress is up, and it's so clear they've got goals that somebody or they are not fulfilling, and their stress builds as that happens. And then just before, like they're on the edge of, they're going to have a drink, or they're going to go and, do something sexually inappropriate, or they're going to go sniff some cocaine. What they capture in the film very powerfully is in each case, before this person falls off the wagon and goes to their drug of choice, they go into hostility first. They point their hostility at whoever they're blaming. And when that doesn't work to reduce their stress, when they don't know how to cancel the goals that are driving their stress, then each and every one of them then falls off the wagon. That's when the guy who's been sober for 20 years takes a drink, or the kid that's been doing drugs, cocaine, goes and gets his coke, or the kid who's sexually addicted. When the stress builds, that's his mechanism. So what we're inviting people to do is turn to willingness. So first question, am I doing more and more of the right things? What's happening with my vitality? Have I hit a new level of vitality? It's the second question I ask. So oftentimes people will start doing this work, and they're building, they're getting stronger. They're like, man, this is so great. I just love this. This is so awesome. And they get a really major opening, a major connection to love, and they go to bed at night and they're just like, oh, this is so awesome. And then they get up in the morning and wonder if anybody got the number of the Mack truck through the room in the middle of the night, because they wake up lower than a snake's belly. It's like, what happened? I was on track. Well, that's what happens when you hit the next level of vitality. Your system says, hey, we've got the vitality to process through this. Now we're going to open the next piece of work to be done. Many people get very confused. This is a really important piece for alcoholics or drug addicts to understand. We've all heard about the guy who was, has been sober for 30 years. He just got his 30-year chip last night, and then, last night fell off the wagon. It's like, what happened? All those friends, all that celebration, all that excitement, all that acknowledgement, whole new level of vitality. And what comes up? Literally the healing crisis around what he used alcohol for. And if he doesn't know that he's got to process those energies out and that's what's happening, oftentimes that's when somebody falls off the wagon. So am I doing more and more of the right things? Have I hit a new level of vitality? Third thing is, what's happening with my elimination? In a disease process, there's a tendency for there to be a restriction of elimination. And we're talking about all of the eliminative organs, the bowel, the urinary tract, the mucous membranes, the skin, the sinuses, the lungs are all eliminative organs. In a healing crisis, there will be a tendency for there to be some sort of a jam up in elimination. And if I'm doing more and more of the right things and hit a new level of vitality, then there's going to be an opening elimination and an increase. So an increase might look like, the flu, might look like a sinus infection, might look like a skin eruption, might look like diarrhea. That's what healing looks like when the body says, I need to get this out of here. We're ready to move through this. I'm going to move it out. And there's that increase in elimination. So that's the third question to ask yourself when you're symptomatic. And then the fourth one is, am I craving the drug that I used to use in order to hide from myself around this issue? And the drug might be raging at somebody. The drug might be, going and getting a sugar fix. The drug might be, going into depression and, moving away from people, isolating oneself. Whatever the addiction was, the thing that people used to try to control their pain previously, they're going to start to have that surface and move through. And if I'm in willingness, if I'm in a state of resistance, unwillingness, I can take something that took 2 minutes, a painful experience that took 2 minutes to develop, and I can be experiencing that pain 10 years later. In willingness, I can take something that maybe happened over a period of 10 years, a major life issue that happened over a period of 10 years, and I can be through it in 2 minutes if I'm in willingness. If I breathe and I'm holding the space and I'm doing the work. And instead of going and getting the sugar fix, I go and eat the sprouts, or I just, decide to fast for a day or so and drink water, then I'm giving my structure the opportunity to process through what it needs to process through, and it can move years of old trauma in seconds, minutes. So willingness is the key there.
Okay.
Does that resonate anything? Any questions? Any thoughts?
Yes, I want to review, and I'm a little distracted on this end. There's a lot of activity around this place today, so I'm a little distracted, and I apologize about that.
Okay, no problem.
Let's see here, standing in willingness. The one point that really caught me, and I'd like to expound a little bit more, the same energy comes out of us that basically went in. So does that mean
Correct.
if we have some fear-based trauma that when, let's just say I was 4 years old, I faced some fear-based trauma, and I am going to work on that fear now, that I'm going to experience the same fear as I work on this process? Is that what that means?
As you click right into a higher level of vitality, the mind will go back and reproduce the thoughts, the feelings, the constructs of the 4-year-old. So one can go back. You're talking to someone, you're doing a worksheet with someone, and they're an adult, and you're having an adult conversation, and they tap into, and all of a sudden they're so confused, and their level of intelligence is literally like a 4-year-old. In fact, we've seen people who, if they're doing a written exercise, their writing will go back to the way they wrote when they were a 4-year-old. Their language, their way of speaking, go back to that of a 4-year-old. Yes. And that whole reality is going to need to be processed out, and that's where the breath comes in, and that's where the willingness comes in.
Okay. Wow.
We may even, there's where the power person dynamic comes in as well. A person who's in denial, dissociating from their own pain, and the pain was something that happened, let's say, with their power person when they were 4. The words that they will use, right down to the language, will be the exact same word patterns as their power person used on them when they were 4. They'll use those same words on the person they're projecting on. They'll make the same kinds of accusations as the power person did to them when they were 4, and the power person's voice speaks through them as them, and they think that it's their own thoughts in their own voice. But what's really happening when they're in the middle of that healing crisis relating to something that happened when they were 4, they're reliving that 4-year-old trauma, and the mind counsels them. Remember, we talked about there are only 3 behaviors possible when one's stuck in the power person dynamic. And the behavior that rules depends on the level of stress. When there's no stress, we'll do what we did to get along with our power person. When stress starts to build, we'll do what we did to resist and survive. When we become ultra stressed, we'll do what we did, our power person did to us that we hated the most. And if people look back and they remember what dad or mom did to them when they were 4, here they are doing it to their own kid 30 years later. And totally, completely down on themselves for it. Like, I didn't want to say that. I'm so sorry, son. I'm so sorry. Dear daughter, I didn't mean to say that to you. It's your power person's voice literally speaking through them. Recorded in the unconscious, triggered into activity by stress, and bang, it takes over. Takes over the voice tones, takes over everything. So that's all part of the healing crisis or the healing process.
So as one gets deeper and deeper working on these issues with the reality management worksheets, this is what we will experience.
Yes.
Absolutely. This experience will come back up through, okay? And then
exactly.
You went
and it's desirable for that to happen because that's how we work through it.
Mm-hmm. Our key is to choose that and be willing.
Yes.
To do it.
That's it.
And how we can tell if we're on the right track is the 4 statements, the 4 things you just described.
The questions.
What
I've been doing more and more of the right things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. More and more of the right things. Elimination. And am I craving the drug I used when this happened initially? So the child of 4 who was totally and completely rained on by the power person during their birthday celebration, just as they were eating a piece of cake and they got dressed down for, you're supposed to let your guests have the first piece of cake. Father raging at them. Here they are 30 years later, raging at somebody over some silly trigger. All the while going, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this.
Yeah.
But until that's uncovered and we come into conscious relationship, here's what happens when we live in denial. Those unconscious dynamics that are inside of us, we cannot look at them honestly, and so we'll take those very dynamics and we'll use those thoughts, those emotions to build and fuel our feelings around a current situation. So those old energetic patterns will come forward and take over from the unconscious level. But and you know, the silliness of that solution is people can stand around all day and say, yeah, it's your fault that I'm feeling all this pain. But they're still feeling all of the pain. The only thing is they're in an indirect relationship with their pain. Because of their denial, the brain cells that contain the pain is being used to produce the picture of them, whoever we're blaming. So if I'm in that circumstance and I live in denial, I still have all the pain of it. It's just that I don't see that it's mine. I've built my brain's image of them out of it, and so I think it's all about them. When I collapse that perception built out of my pain that makes me think it's about them, then by collapsing my projected reality, it opens a pathway into the underlying dynamic that needs to be healed. And now I get to bring that up directly. So now I feel the pain directly. And in the presence of active love, if I will allow myself to feel the pain directly, the pain will dissolve. That's the master solvent for pain, is conscious, active, present love. If I can't quite muster enough of it myself, our conversation yesterday, what do? I go to someone who is able to hold the space, and I touch the hem of their garment, as that woman did with Yeshua. And by so doing, I get the extra vitality that I need to process through this fully. Otherwise, I might have difficulty processing through it, or it might be an extended process. So that's where it's always nice to have somebody who can hold the space for you. That's the power of having an accountability. That's the power of having an accountability partner to do worksheets with.
Mm-hmm. The portion on elimination.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell me that again, please?
Sure.
I got the other three.
Once I'm standing in willingness, I've got a new level of vitality. The stuff that I have, they call it stuff for a reason, that I have stuffed, literally that I've locked into tissue, I now have the vitality to open that and allow it to move, to be released. How is it going to release? There are several eliminative channels that will tend to open up. And as they open up, when I stand in willingness, I access something I haven't dealt with. And, let's say, for instance, and I don't know why this particular example comes to mind or why it's relative, but that's what comes to mind. There was a gentleman who was at Heartland for almost 2 years on the support team. And he was in his 40s, and he had really nasty eczema. And he'd done all the medical things. He'd done everything to deal with his eczema. He was about a year into being there and dealt with some really major life issues. And his eczema just disappeared. So the kid was probably 38 or 40. And he'd had this skin elimination dis-ease for, 35 of his 40 or so years. And it was pretty nasty looking. But his skin was trying to eliminate that which he wasn't willing to face that was stored in tissue. Once he was willing to step in and experience what was going on inside of him that he had denied and dissociated from, and always projected on everybody else, all of a sudden his skin didn't have to work overtime to try to eliminate the toxicity of what he was holding on to. And it was based in rage. And as he was able to let go of that rage, all of a sudden his eczema cleared up. Skin looked just fine. So the elimination process can look like anything, any part of the eliminative system. Sometimes people will touch into a toxic energy, an unresolved issue in their lives, and all of a sudden their breath just turns totally foul. In still point breathing sessions, I've had people over the years that had never had anesthetic in their life, but their mother had anesthetic in their birth. And as they were doing the still point breathing process, all of a sudden the room filled up with the smell of anesthetic. That's an eliminative process. And wherever that, my offering would be that wherever that anesthetic, here's this adult, they've never had anesthetic, but mom did, so where else did it come from? Must have been an energy that came in when mom was going through the birthing process. Where was that anesthetic stored, and what did it keep anesthetized in this person's life all the years that they carried it, until they were willing to open deal with their own energy system on that level. And, as you start to open, you never know what the healing crisis is going to look like. You never know what the process is going to be. It can look like, lung congestion. It can look like sinus congestion. It can look like eczema. It can look like diarrhea. Oftentimes people's urine will begin to just turn dark, and the smell is just horrendous as somebody opens, and the old toxicity that's being held to is no longer restricted. It's able to move. So it can look like any kind of disease process that anybody's ever had. And disease processes they haven't had, but were in their bloodline. I have a perennial issue for me. It's one I've been working on for about 10 years now, maybe a little longer than that. My last memory of my grandmother, I was her favorite grandson of a dozen or so. I was the only one. I was from a family of 4 kids, and I was the only one who would ever go to Grandma's house and stay. Everybody else, no, they wouldn't. I loved to go there. I would go and stay there for weeks. And my last memory of my grandmother, of course, she was one of my favorite people too, was she's on her deathbed, and they had cut off her toes, diabetes. They had cut off the front half of her foot. Next stage, they cut off to the ankles. The next stage, they took her off both knees. That's when she died, was when they got to the knees. My mother had horrendous foot distortion. If you've ever seen an example of somebody with, toes bent and twisted and bunions and that sort of thing. I mean, my mother's feet. I never once heard her complain or speak of pain in her feet. But now when I see in my mind, with what my experience has been, when I look in my mind at what her feet look like, she went through hell. And about 10 or 12 years ago, I started having foot challenges. And I've gone through many, many layers of it. And that's one that I still work on from time to time, as I recognize the genetic component of that and stand in the space of willingness to embrace it, do what it takes to get to the next level of vitality, to access that and process through it. And so then Michael, when it starts to move, to stand in willingness.
I would like to ask, I know you mentioned mothers. Can this be anything in our bloodline, back generations?
Anything. Yes.
It can be. Okay.
Yeah. Let's go to the book about genetics called the Bible. What do they say? The sins of the fathers will be passed, yea, unto 3 and 4 generations of those who hate me, of those who are separated from the active presence of love. When we welcome active present love in the presence of our healing crisis, whatever the underlying energy is, it dissolves. Look to the lives of the fathers, for ours are but a shadow of theirs upon the earth. If we don't consciously, purposely deal with and forgive the mind energy of those things that our fathers and our mothers and our grandfathers and grandmothers and their grandmothers and grandfathers and theirs before them went through, then the very thought patterns, the very word patterns will be resonated right out of our genes and come out of our mouths, and we'll go, holy crap, what did I say that? Where did that come from? And it'll be a pattern that comes from those generations.
You have a question about that in the chat room, too.
Oh, great. Let's go for it, Jeannie. Let's bring the question in. May help refine it some.
Wanting to break the pattern is often not enough to change it. So how do you stop it when you're in the midst of reacting like they did? How can you recognize the power person dynamic and change it before you do it?
Great question. And here's the answer. I suggest that you go back to day 1 of the radio show 11 years ago and then listen to every show from day 1, 5 days a week, an hour a day, And in the last couple of years, 2 hours. They listen to all of that, and that's the only question that I or Dr. Tim will answer over the last 11 years. Tool we've got is what you use. Which tool you've used and you find most effective for you will be the tool that you'll likely pick up in any given circumstance. But it might be nothing more than to just stop and breathe. It might be to just take a breath and connect to active present love. It might look like sitting down and doing a worksheet. It might look like getting out the codependence worksheet and doing that worksheet. It might look like getting the commitment out and speaking it to this person that I have conflict with, or speaking it to myself when I'm looking in the mirror. It might look like responsibility communication. It'll look like every tool I've got, and that's what I'm going to do in order to change those dynamics. And it tends to be kind of a constitutional growth, so to speak. And here's what I mean by a constitutional growth. Let's imagine that we have a baby in a carriage, and we're beside the road, and a car pulls up beside the carriage on the road. The driver gets out and walks away, and the car does not have its wheels properly set and the emergency brake set, rolls down the hill and crashes. The baby, laying in the baby carriage, is totally and completely oblivious. It doesn't know what a car is. It doesn't know what a crash is. It doesn't know that $100,000 damage was just done. Has no idea. And most people, when they first start out doing their work, have no idea of the hostility and fear coming out of their mouths and the damage that they're doing to themselves and to other people. And so most people start in oblivion. Then imagine that, so that's the starting point when people start to become cognizant of what's going on inside of them and they're going to do their work. At first, no idea. Then imagine that we have a child of 3 that's standing on the curb. And the car pulls up and parks. The driver walks away. The car rolls down the hill and crashes. The child of 3 looks, and they're not quite sure what's going on. They know that the car, Dad just got out of the car. The car shouldn't be rolling down the hill. They're not quite sure what's going on, and they know that something not so good happened when it crashed at the bottom of the hill. But they don't have a whole lot of awareness of it. They just know something's not right here. Constitutional growth. The child of 6 stands on the side of the road. Car is improperly parked. Dad walks away. Car rolls down the hill. This child of 6 goes, Dad's supposed to be behind the wheel. I remember hearing something about a brake, and I know something needs to be done. So he starts running for the car, but of course his legs are so short he can't even start to get to it. The car crashes. The kid of 12 stands on the side of the curb. The car gets parked, not properly. Dad walks away. Car rolls down the hill. The kid knows. Brake, car, there's trouble here. And he takes off, but his legs aren't quite long enough. He gets his hand on the handle to try to open the door, but he can't do it. It's not fast enough. The kid of 18 watches the car start to roll, knows exactly what's wrong, knows exactly what to do about it, and heads off down the hill, and his legs are long enough, and he does get the door open, jumps in, and hits the brake. The mature adult parks the car on the side of the hill, sets the wheel, sets the emergency brake, and that's the end of the problem. That's the kind of growth that comes with this work. At first, we're oblivious to what's my part in it. All I know is, there's my uncle or my aunt or my brother or my friend or my employee over there, and they're the problem in life, and that's all I want to know about it. They are totally oblivious to the fact that they're co-creators in this situation and they've got a part in it. And when they clean up their part in it, that'll be the end of the trauma. It's a growth process that happens as one awakens and uses each and every tool. That's why we've been doing this radio show for 11 years, so that people have a place to hang out and build the brain cells for the deepest refinements, because you can only construct the reality for what you've got brain cells for. You know, the baby in the baby carriage had no brain cells for car, accident, nothing. The kid at 12 had built some brain cells. The kid at 18 that made the run and stopped the car had the brain cells to know exactly what to do. And so as one continues to work with these tools, each one becomes, it's a matter of refining the skill, developing the ability to work with yourself as conscious, active, present love, and to clean up the generational patterns through forgiveness. That's one half of the journey. The second half of the journey is is cultivating a relationship, taking time each day to center and get still and to be with the conscious, active, present love that you are. So I hope that answers the question in the chat room. And if there's any refinement needed, let us know whether we got there or not. Michael?
Yes, sir. I do have one little wrap-up on the eliminative
Yes.
channels. You clearly talked about the physical. Can it? And my guess would be yes. It's also emotional and spiritual.
Oh yeah. Again,
okay.
3 levels: physical, mental, emotional. On a physical level, it's any kind of physical symptom and low energy. When you start taking these things apart and restructuring them, it takes a lot of energy. And so somebody can be high as a kite, and then they go into a healing crisis, and all of a sudden it's like, I'm so tired, I have to go. I can hardly keep my eyes open. I'm almost falling over to sleep. I need to go to bed. Well, that can be where someone's stepping into the deeper levels of processing, and it takes a lot of energy to do that. So that's the physical level. Again, the mental, any kind of negative thought, right back from the beginning of time with our genes. Geez, where did this thought come from? I'm not even, I've never thought thoughts like that. And somebody that's a member of the family there said, oh, that's exactly how Grandpa used to talk. When did you get that? Mm-hmm. And then the emotional, yes. Any kind of negative feeling and depression is what healing looks like when you step in and start to process out what needs to be processed. Willingness is the
Thank
grease.
you.
Cosmic grease.
Cosmic grease. I remember that one.
Cosmic grease. Yep.
Powerful.
So now number 3. You ready to go on to number 3?
Yes, sir.
So
number 3.
You'll notice that in your whole life, unless which I know you're not, unless one is generally just a miserable person, you're pretty happy with most everybody around you, as long as they're fulfilling the goals that you hold for them. You're pretty happy with yourself, as long as you are fulfilling the goals that you hold for yourself. But notice how, when there's one of those things I wish I'd gotten done, I wish I'd achieved that I didn't, what do people do? Slam the door, kick the cat, rage at somebody? Notice you've never raged or been upset with someone unless they violated a goal you hold for them. You're never upset with yourself unless you violated a goal that you hold for yourself. Does that fit for you?
Yes. Yes, I can grasp that one.
Okay. So that's so important to understand, because this is a key way into first century Aramaic forgiveness, to actual forgiveness work. The Greeks did not understand. the Greeks turned forgiveness into, of course, they were, most of the Greeks were in the religion of denial. They had somebody else to blame. So what did it become? What did forgiveness be? Okay, well, Bill, this is all your fault, but it's okay. I'll forgive you. I'll let you off the hook for the pain that my energy field is generating. Well, when you think about that, it's really pretty silly. I'm going to let him off the hook because my structure is generating pain? That doesn't really make any sense at all. But when you've got a whole society that lives in denial and dissociation, it's all everybody else's fault. Of course, the logical thing would be, well, then, if it's his fault, then I'll let him off the hook. Properly labeled, letting somebody else off the hook for something is pardoning, which is a nice thing to do. But, Vladimir Lenin says, if you want to destroy a culture, here's a guy who's probably responsible for more deaths on planet Earth than anybody in human history. He says, if you want to destroy a culture, you change the meaning of its words. When they turned forgiveness into pardoning, they eradicated forgiveness. And now it became about, I let you off the hook. I let you off the hook. I know. If I stand and shake the hand of 7.5 billion people on the planet one by one and let every one of them off the hook for the pain that's inside of me, have I done anything to change the pain inside of me? Absolutely nothing. No. So pardon somebody if you will, and then when you accurately call that what it is, which is pardoning, then you recognize, now I'm going to do my forgiveness work. My system is generating some kind of trauma or pain here, so I'm going to go to work and clean that up. I'm going to remove what's at the root of this pain. Now I'm doing actual forgiveness work. And the key way into doing that is with goals. And we're down to about 60 seconds, so how about tomorrow we step in and start with the goal aspect of it in step 3.
Okay.
All right.
That sounds like a good plan to me. Thank you, Michael.
I'm with it 100%. And thank you for thinking through it and asking the questions and helping us to lay this thing out in this way. I think this is really going to serve people. So much appreciation, Michael.
Thank you. And same here. Appreciate you both very much. And